Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Jelani. I am the president of HUE, which stands for Helping Unite Everyone. I also work at the Orchard as the finance manager. This event is so important to us because within our mission, we have a statement that talks about helping to elevate people of color and helping to champion for diversity by fostering conversations around elevating people of color. And I wholeheartedly believe the conversation that we're about to witness between Senator Jamaal Bailey and Errol Louis embodies those sentiments perfectly. Um, Earlier, I heard someone say that 2020 has been a perpetual rainy day, and I felt that. But I think what 2020 has taught us all is that we're in this together, and the only way we can make any type of change is if we do it together. So as we also know, 2020 is an election year, and November is coming at us super fast. So that is why voting and voter education is so important to me, because I believe that we must utilize our power and advocate for our rights to vote, not only at the federal level, but locally as well. So it is an honor to have these type of conversations right now. And I hope two things are taken away from this event. One, that everyone is re-energized to take on November 3rd in your local elections, but also that you witness that politicians and correspondents are literally just like you, and they're always willing to have a conversation to uplift and empower us. So I just want to say thank you so much, Senator Errol, Jeff, Deidre, Lizette, and Sam, for helping make this HUE idea become a reality. It means everything to us. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sam, who's going to get this show started.
Hey guys, I can't thank you enough all for being here. It really does mean a lot to not only me and Jelani, but all of you. We really want everyone to be engaged and to have as many impactful conversations as we can. So if everyone doesn't know me, just as a brief introduction, I'm Sam, and I am the Events and Operations Officer on HUE. So that means that I help make all of these things come to life. And it's a fun job, and I'm really thankful and really proud to be a part of an organization like this that really wants to push conversations forward and ensure that everyone is heard from whatever background that you come from. And so just as a means of helping people organize and understand how the event is going to work. So for the first 30 minutes, it's going to be a conversation between the senator and Errol, kind of going back and forth. But then we thought that it would be really important to include you. So at 12:35, you'll notice that the Q&A box, I think it's on your right-hand side, I could be wrong, will be made available, and you can ask any question that you have. And the senator and Errol will be able to review them, and we'll get to you. And we just want to once again, make sure that we are including as many people as we can and that our conversation is impactful. So with that, also, I want to kick off the event and introduce Errol Louis, who I think is incredible. So just a little bio on him. He is, once again, an incredible New York journalist and an alumni of Harvard College, where he graduated with a BA in government. He also earned an MA in political science from Yale and a JD from Brooklyn Law School. Currently, he is the political anchor. He is a political anchor of Spectrum News, New York One. And he hosts Inside City Hall, which you guys should check out. And he focuses on New York politics. He also hosts a really great podcast called You Decide, and you guys should also check that out. I believe it's available on most platforms where podcasts are made available. And he also frequently works with platforms and websites and TV stations such as CNN, where he engages and facilitates conversations on important and relevant topics. And that's why we're really grateful for him to be involved in today, because he asks really poignant questions and really cares. And that's really, really important to us. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Errol Louis, and they can start. Oh, Errol, you're currently on mute.
Much as, there we go. Okay, thank you, Sam, for that very nice introduction. Thank you, Jelani, and thank you the whole technical team for all of the work that went into this. I want to start, I guess, by kind of laying a little bit of background, describing the conversation we're about to have, and I think you'll find it. I think everyone will find it very enriching. And I, frankly, have a goal here, which is to make sure everybody knows a lot more about the upcoming election and the role that you can play over and above simply going out to vote. We'll start by saying that we want to almost take that for granted. Everybody needs to vote every single time. I think it'll be clear by the end of this conversation just how important that is. But then beyond that, be a source of information for others, be a leader whether it's sitting around having a cup of coffee or talking with people on your block. Folks really, really need to hear the message about what is going on in this state and in this country, and the fact that they really do need to get involved. So having said that, let me just lay a little bit of the background of the gentleman I'm going to be talking to. Jamaal Bailey is a state senator, and to understand what that means and the kind of power that's involved in being a state senator, you should know that every time you go and take a cab, there's a 50-cent surcharge that's a tax that goes to the state. Every time you buy almost anything, you're going to pay 4%. You're going to pay some sales tax. About 4% of that sales tax, about half of it, goes to the state of New York. The people who set that tax and collect that tax and then designate how it will be spent are the 212 members of the state legislature. And the 62 senators are a really important part of that. They're the senior sort of upper house. Jamaal Bailey is part of that. He's somebody who helps determine how $175 billion, which is the current size of the state budget, gets spent. That's this year. And then next year, another 175. It might be higher, but these days might be a little lower. But the point being, they're big, big numbers, and they reach into every corner of your life. So what I often tell people is that you're involved in government and politics, whether you like it or not. You're funding it, and therefore you might as well have something to say about how it gets spent. Almost everything. I mean, money for SUNY, money for CUNY, money for the state parks. You go out to Jones Beach. Almost anything you can think of, including about half of the tax on that restaurant tab that you pay every time you go and eat out, again, going back to the state. So Jamaal Bailey is somebody who came up in the Bronx, went to Bronx Science, went to University of Albany, SUNY Albany, went to CUNY Law School. These great public institutions helped to shape him, as well as a strong family and an important church in that part of the city. And he has really been kind of lighting things up since 2016 when he first got elected. And with no further ado, let me introduce him and say hello. Hello, Senator. Thank you for joining us.
Errol, I'm happy to be here, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you to, again, Sam and Jelani. And as you mentioned, most importantly, like the folks in the background, we're all hand, and I'll say, you know, one thing you learn as being an elected official, you have to make sure you thank the staff, because 99 times out of 100, they're working, if not harder, just as hard as you. So we want to make sure we recognize all of those people. And I'm just excited that Sony invited me, and thanks to HUE, because representation matters. And as Errol, as you said, I don't want to step on the toes of the conversation we're going to have, but it's critical, right? You are involved in government and politics, whether you recognize it or not, whether you want to be or not. Every single thing that you do, from the food that you buy, to the gas that you buy, to the route that you take home from work that may be closed because of street repair, is a political decision, and it should be predicated upon what you have to do. But you got to get involved. You got to get in the game.
Absolutely. And just to let people know a little bit more about you, you grew up in or near Co-op City, right? I mean, I actually grew up I live in Brooklyn now, have for the last 30 plus years, but I grew up in New Rochelle, not far from you. And I remember, I'm old enough that I remember when Co-op City first opened, and it was a big, big deal. A chance for home ownership for working class people. A lot of Black and Latino families went there. I remember going there to visit some family friends, and we were all like, ooh, look at this. It was brand new at the time. What was it like when you came along, I guess, a generation later?
Co-op City is still one of these neighborhoods that is recognizable from the highway when you drive by, but it's recognizable to communities all around the state. When you sit and talk to your colleagues from Buffalo to Broome County, they know about Co-op City. And while I grew up in the Wakefield section, I didn't grow up in Co-op City. I'm sort of an adopted son of Co-op City. I spent a lot of time in school there. Two of my aunts live there. My dad lives there. So there's a lot of personal things that pull me to Co-op City, but the unique nature of it, as you mentioned, being able to have an opportunity for Mitchell-Lama, for middle-income folks to have the dream of home ownership realized in a safe and quality community, there's nothing better.
Okay, and now because of the nature of the folks that we are talking to today, I've got to ask you, what is on your playlist? What are you listening to these days when you work out or when you travel, when you're relaxing?
Oh man, so like the Versus series has really energized me in the music. I tuned in to the Brandy and Monica Versus, and I for one forgot how many hits that Monica had. You know, like I just maybe because we saw Moesha and we remember Brandy as being more popular, but I forgot that Monica had hits, man. Like, and so I am a student of hip hop. I'm a student of R&B, and as Jelani mentioned, 2020 has been a struggle. So for me, this has been encapsulated in a J. Cole song, "Love Yours." There's beauty in the struggle, ugliness in the success. Right? Like there's going to be something after we get past this year. And what it is up to us as a collective. And so I would say that's on my playlist. The new Drake and Little Durk is on my playlist. Little Brother's album that came out last year, May the Lord Watch, is a really underrated, timely piece of hip hop in my mind. But to be quite honest, I got little kids, so it goes from the Frozen playlist to to Juvenile. I got a lot of things on shuffle, but I'm eclectic in my taste and
I know how that goes. So look, the way I gave a brief and partial introduction, but I want to go a little deeper into what it is you do, and not you in particular, but every senator, every lawmaker. I think of it as an act of extreme leverage in our democracy, meaning $175 billion. Each Senate district is about 322,000 people, of which in a good election, maybe 15, 20,000 people actually come out to vote. And they determine who is going to be the senator. In your case, somebody who's going to help spend $175 billion a year. That to me gives the voter an immense amount of power. Potentially over what's going to happen. How do you see yourself in that whole equation?
I want people to be empowered and aware and informed, right? I don't want it to be 15 or 20,000 people that vote. I would love it if everybody voted, point blank period, because I want people to be able to say that they're part of the equation, because we are public employees. Right. And I know people might not think of us elected officials as such, but we are employees of the constituents who vote us in. So I work for the people in the 36th senatorial district. And it's weird. Sometimes elected officials are deified in some way, and we're praised in ways that I believe that we shouldn't necessarily be. Though I do think that we work hard, we shouldn't be deified. We are regular people just like anybody else in our district. And we actually work for the people. So one, you got to get involved. Right. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, as they say. And that's real. Being able to figure out and let us know what is happening in our districts. The one thing I will say is we have 322,000 people that we represent, and we do an incredible job with our staff. So I'm trying to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening, but we need you out there to tell us what's going on in every corner, because I can walk but so many blocks, but I need people in other areas to tell me, Senator, this is what's happening in my community. This is what's happening. Give us an opportunity to fix things. So you got to speak up and speak out and give us a call when you can.
And is it fair to say, I mean, I know this just from talking with operatives and with political figures over the years, if there's a building or a block or a set of buildings where there's a lot of voter participation, it almost lights up on the map, right? I mean, you get a call from certain areas and you know, okay, those people are engaged, those people are going to vote. Those people are my bosses for real, and I got to make sure that we're going to take care of everybody, but we definitely have to take care of those folks, as opposed to a building where, for whatever reason, or a complex where almost nobody votes, and it looks in political voting terms almost like a vacant lot or a vacant building. Talk a little bit about sort of just the reality of that. I mean, you know, folks are always told to go out and vote, but I don't know if people really understand what it's like when you do, the level of attention that you're going to get when you do vote regularly.
Well, I look at it in terms of targeting. I would never exclude or not go to a building that has low voter participation. But for example, when we have mail, right? When we send out mail in the state Senate, we have a finite mail budget because it is irresponsible for us to spend so much money on trying to mail to every single person. So we have data about people who have voted in recent elections. And so using the finite amount of money that we have to mail, we mail to the people who have had a record of voting. It's not that I don't want to mail to the people who don't vote, because I think you matter just as much as the people who do vote. It is simply saying that in a world of finite resources, we have to be mindful of how we target. Now, with social media and other things like that, it's easier to cast a wider net, but that's also incumbent upon people meeting us halfway and saying, hey, for example, this coming Friday at my district office, I have a book bag giveaway and a hot meal giveaway, right? I've put it on every single social media platform, but because of the time sensitive nature of it, I don't have the ability to mail it out because it would get to people in the mail much later than we want to have to turn around. So we have to rely on word of mouth, social media, and making phone calls. I don't know if I can reach every person in the district because of that, but it's not because I don't want people that don't vote to get a book bag. I definitely want people that don't vote and that do vote to get a book bag. I just have to figure out how do we effectively reach people, essentially that want to be reached. And I want you to want to be reached is what I'm saying.
That's an excellent way of putting it. So let's get more into the particulars of your job. You chair a very powerful committee called the Codes Committee. Explain what that is and why so many people want that job, and you're lucky to have gotten it.
Well, I'm grateful to Lita Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and today is her birthday, so happy birthday, Madam Lita. She allowed me to be the chair of the Codes Committee because the Codes Committee is the committee of original jurisdictions for essentially all criminal justice-related matters in the New York State Senate. In the New York State Assembly, it's a little different. It is an even more powerful committee because it is a committee of dual reference, meaning that it can pull bills from different areas. In the Senate, it's not a dual reference committee, but it's still incredibly important when you think about the power of what's happening in our justice system. So all of the criminal justice bills that have been passed in recent months, they go through my committee. Conversations about the state of police reform, they go through my committee. And it's something that I truly enjoy, not just as an attorney, but probably more importantly as a man of color, understanding that the justice system needed reformation. And I think that my leadership, along with those of my colleagues, we've been able to make huge leaps and bounds, but there's still plenty to do.
And much of this came to fruition in June, where bills that you had written, in some cases years ago, because of all of the protests that was out there, I call it the uprising for racial justice that was going on in New York and nationally, gave you an opportunity to get some of these laws passed. And I wanted to talk about a couple of them. You were the lead sponsor on the repeal of a law called 50A. So explain to people what that was all about, why it took so long to get it passed, and what it now means that you got that law passed.
So critically important, 50A of the Civil Rights Law was a bill that was in 1976 drafted by Senator Frank Padovan to prevent people from annoying and harassing police officers. Throughout the years, the treatment of that law became such that it became an impenetrable bar towards obtaining police disciplinary records. It was never intended to be that. The sponsor of the legislation indicated as much. And so in recent years, we wanted to make sure we changed that, because when you have police involved killings and homicides, some would call them murders, I would, involving Ramarley Graham and with Richard Haste, and Eric Garner and Sean Bell, the names of those officers would not be released. The disciplinary records of those officers were not released, if not so for some timely leaks within the police department. And we can't rely on leaks in the police departments to be able to find out who public servants are that have committed an act of injustice. So Repealing 50A is about transparency. It is about making sure that people know who the individuals that are policing their streets are. And what it's not, and the reason why I think it took so long is because anytime you do something that is considered to be reformation of anything, specifically law enforcement is looked at as being an anti-police, piece of legislation. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm not anti-police, but anybody that also knows me knows that I'm pro-reform and making sure that we have racial justice and equality. And for so long, it was painted as something that was anti-police, which couldn't be furthest from the truth, right? Like whether you're black or you're white or you're a police officer or you're a Latino, it doesn't matter. You want safe streets and you want to trust people who police those, right? Had nothing to do with an animus towards police.
Yeah, I mean, there are public servants of all kinds. And, as a journalist, I can tell you, because we do this, we find out if somebody who happens to be a public servant has been arrested, in a bar fight or something like that, or if somebody's been fired from their job for malfeasance. This is public information. The public has a right to know it. We get that information and we publish it. The idea that this one area was carved out for this one set of public servants on extremely important matters was a real problem. And so you got that one solved. There were a bunch of other bills, though, that you guys all got passed at the same time. There were about 10 of them that I think were really important, and we don't have time to go through all of them, but the Eric Garner anti-chokehold law got passed, and that was a long time coming. I mean, that, the incident itself happened in 2014. 6 years later, it finally got passed. Talk a little bit about what it took to get that law passed.
It took the knee on the neck of George Floyd and the collective neck of Black America for 8 minutes and 46 seconds for people to wake up and realize that what we've been saying as Black and brown people, that this is not just us making these things up. We have what I believe to be indisputable video evidence that this is happening and it's been happening to us. And when we saw it on video before with Eric Garner, but people, well, let's look at context. Now, we know that the context was taken away because we saw what happened in the George Floyd video. And to show how far we've come in terms of people recognizing this was a bill that was unanimously passed in the New York State Senate. And Errol is a veteran of New York State politics, and he can tell you what a rarity it is to have a bill of that level of controversy to pass a divided House in many ways unanimously, 62-0. Not one Republican, not to be partisan, folks. I'm a Democrat, but not to be overly partisan. Not one Republican voted against that bill because they realized that enough is enough, and we can't blame. We can't say this is an anti-police animus when we simply want common sense legislation.
You got a bill passed that is known as the Amy Cooper bill, making it a hate crime when 911 calls go in falsely with racial animus as the purpose of it. Amy Cooper, going back to that case in Central Park where the woman tried to call the cops on somebody who had done absolutely nothing to her.
So that bill again was something that happened within 24 hours of George Floyd, right? So Amy Cooper happened, and then within the same 24-hour period, George Floyd happened, and the weaponization of whiteness, for lack of a better term, in Central Park, the knee on the neck, that came to, well, we have to do something about this. So, we shouldn't be utilizing precious resources. And again, I'll say it to be fair, our men and women that serve us in police departments, they serve us incredibly well for the vast majority of them, and they have better things to do than to answer people who are making false, racially biased 911 calls. So I'm glad we got that done. There are, without getting into too much detail, there are bills that now make it possible, legally possible, for bystanders to videotape and record incidents that they see on the street involving the police. There used to be some kind of, question about whether or not it was proper or legal and so forth, but as long as you're not interfering, you do have the right. Very important for people to know. You've got a bill that's gonna
collect statistics on how force is used, which is also important. These kind of laws that you got passed this year, is this kind of a one-off? Is this an unusual season because of the protests, because of what happened to Mr. Floyd, or is this the start of maybe a change in how things are done in New York?
I believe it's going to be the start of change. It has to be. Again, if you look at the way that these pieces of legislation were passed. For example, there was a bill about weapons discharge that got passed. Last year, that bill passed the Senate 44-17. This year, that bill passed 60-2, meaning that more members of the Republican Party, who sometimes do not agree with what we say Democratic in the Democratic Party for whatever reason, they saw it fit to vote in larger numbers for more of these pieces of legislation, which shows that across political lines, across racial lines, people recognize that, or I hope that they recognize that things have not been fair to certain subsets of people for quite some time. And we have to continue to have conversations, uncomfortable conversations often, but we have to have these conversations to move the ball forward. So I think it's the start of change, as long as we continue to have conversations, because just putting something out there for the people, and I'm glad people are more woke, so to speak, like they're not just going to accept things here. This is what it is. No, I don't want that to happen. I want you to be part of the conversation going forward.
So now let's talk a little bit about the other big story that nobody can escape, which is the pandemic and the response to it. We watched day after day as the governor did what he did. Folks have a lot of different emotions about it, different opinions about it. What was your sense of Cuomo's leadership, the governor's leadership at the height of the pandemic?
I mean, you have to give him credit. We were facing something that nobody had any concept on how to deal with. Not the doctors, not government officials, because this was something that we had never seen. It was something that descended on us like they say locusts do in the South. My family's from the South, so that's where I get that phrase from. It descended on us like that, and we could not escape it. So understanding that, I think that the governor did a good job in navigating the waters. The issue that I had with, in general, how the country dealt with it was how it impacted Black and brown people. We suffer from adverse health statistics because of a lack of access to adequate health care. And disproportionately, we knew that we would be disproportionately affected. So we reached out to colleagues in government from the White House on down, or the White House on up, depending on which way you look at it, right? And we said, this is going to affect our communities more than it will other communities. Nothing against other communities, but this is going to hit us harder. Let's get testing centers now. Let's get more tests now. And the federal government sat on their hands, period. They sat on their hands and they did nothing to help us in the state of New York. And they wouldn't ship us ventilators. They were playing political football with apparatus that can save people's lives. That, in my eyes, was egregious and disgusting by the Trump administration. And as you know me, Errol, I'm not a bomb thrower, but this is not something that I can stand idly for. We were treated disrespectfully by the federal government, point blank, period.
Yeah. And so we heard a lot of horror stories. I don't remember hearing any in particular out of your district, but I know that your district, when I looked at health statistics, was one of the hardest hit anywhere in the Northeast Bronx there. I don't know if that's because there were more nursing homes up there or more elderly or what the issues are, but going forward, what is the path? I mean, I've been intrigued by this notion that we need to create resiliency by working on wellness, helping people deal with things like obesity and hypertension and diabetes and other underlying factors that allow COVID to hit especially hard. Is there anything on the horizon that we can look to that will help deal with some of that?
Absolutely. I have a phrase that if health is wealth, you don't want to go bankrupt, right? You want to keep those health deposits in the positive, so to speak. And in my district, we do some things. I have senior walks where I get seniors active and involved. I do some things with some other organizations. I'm not going to promote them, here, but I do plenty of work within the health space because it's critically important. I myself have lost about 15 to 20 pounds in the last calendar year because my cholesterol was high. I was drinking too much soda and I was just eating poorly. And I wanted to be around. I got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I want to be around for their sweet 16, for their weddings, for their graduations from law school. No pressure, girls. I want to be around for that. And I recognize that the path that I was on was one of self-destruction, as they said with the hip hop song back in the day. So, and the reason why those numbers were so high, Errol, is because during the pandemic, they told us, stay home, stay home. Well, the nurses, the 1199 and 32BJ and the essential workers that live here in my district, they couldn't stay home. They had to go to work. And the vast majority of them, you guessed it, are Black and brown, specifically Black and brown women who went to work day after day after day, serving people, taking care of people, so that we as a collective could remain safe. And that's the reason why it spiked so much. In addition to, as you said, the unfortunate circumstances that sometimes we put a little bit too much hot sauce on our food sometimes, and we gotta put a little bit less salt and slow it down. Seltzer is better than soda, right? Like little things go along with it.
What's been your track record with getting that message out to people? There for a lot of folks, they just kind of draw the line at how they live and what they eat, right? I mean, there's this background noise out there that you need to live better. And most people, I think, understand that they could lose a few pounds, they could probably work on their diet a little bit, and that it's better to walk than always ride. It's better to stand than always lay down. But they don't necessarily want to hear it from a journalist or a politician, what they should be doing. And yet the information needs to get inside their heads, right?
Absolutely. Again, wellness, like you have to be around for those you care about. And if anything, if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's an old sports adage: the best ability is availability, right? And if you're not available for your family, if you're not around to help them, I guess, stand up, for lack of a better term, then you have to be, you're absent and you're silent. But one point I do want to make about what's happened in communities of color, by and large, we are many of us are in food deserts. Sometimes we don't have access to healthy and fresh food. I will never forget, in law school, I watched a documentary that was called Bodega Down Bronx, and it had a young lady in a bodega, and she picked up a grapefruit pie, and she said, "This is fruit. This is the fruit that I eat." And to me, I laughed at first, but then it hurt my heart, because if this is what we think is going to be part of our RDA for fruit or vegetables, then we've got a long way to go. So again, I try to partner with community stakeholders to bring us more fresh fruit, farmers markets, things that, typically we're not necessarily in our communities. We've got to eat better, period.
Oh yeah. Now there's food deserts where the fresh food is not available, and then there's what they call food swamps, where Popeyes followed by KFC followed by Burger King, and that's pretty much all you've got as food options. But before we open it up to comments and questions from the folks who are on this, I want to talk about what's on everybody's mind, which is the upcoming election. And I wanted to start with the question of ballot security. Is this going to be a fair election? We just had a primary where there were a lot of stuff that went wrong. The system was overloaded here in the city. The Board of Elections had far more mail ballots than they'd ever had before, and they didn't necessarily rise to the occasion. We also hear reports about, mailboxes being plucked off the street deliberately by some of the higher ups in the Postal Service. What can you tell people about how secure this election is going to be?
You should feel comfortable voting by mail. You should feel absolutely comfortable that your vote will be counted. Look, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and especially if you're in New York, The governor's executive order it permits you to request your absentee ballot now, and you can check off. I forget exactly what the box is, but it relates to temporary disability, and it's related to COVID. You can do that right now if you live in New York at this very moment while you're watching this. I know you're not really paying attention, so you use your laptop and do something else. But in all seriousness, you can do that right now. Get that ballot and mail it in as soon as possible. And if you're not going to do that, I would suggest we've enacted early voting. Thanks to my good friend, Senator Jamaal Bailey. We got that bill passed on his first day in the New York State Senate. Another up and coming young brother in the state Senate to look out for. We can now vote 10 days early, up to 10 days early. So if you're going to go in person, I would encourage you to go early. People are going to be hopefully excited about this ticket that we have. I'm being a little partisan here, but you should be excited to vote in general, because as Errol aptly put it, you have the power to do so. So you should feel comfortable about going out there and voting, but you should feel more comfortable about putting that vote in the mail.
You know, we split the difference at my house. We applied for and received the absentee ballots because we didn't know what was going to be going on. And then as early voting started, we said, you know what, let's take a walk over to the polling site. It's in the Brooklyn Museum, the one that we use. And we walked over and it looked great. You know, they would sanitize your hands when you walked in. They had social distancing. They had these shields, you know, when you went to get your ballot. Everybody had gloves and masks, and it was good enough that we said, you know what, let's just go ahead and do this. So people should know, applying for an absentee ballot, a mail-in ballot, doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it. You always have the option of, as the senator said, go in for early voting and see if you feel comfortable doing it. And we just breezed in and out of there. You know, you go on a Sunday morning or something like that where nobody's there. What did you do this last time around? Did you vote in person or did you send in a ballot?
I voted in person because, again, my kids like to vote. Like to go with me to vote. One, they like stickers, right? Most importantly, they like the stickers. That's why they go. That's the hook. So like stickers, go vote. But most importantly, I like to take them because I want them to get used to this as a civic exercise that they will do unconsciously, right? Now, make sure you know who you're voting for. It's critical. So you don't go unconscious to the polls and just go down the line if that's not what you want to do. You should know who you're voting for. But I want my daughters to know that voting is not optional in this house. My wife and I, like we vote every election, primary, special, like whatever's on the ballot, whenever there's something to vote for, we're voting for it. And I want my daughters to get that. So that's more personal for me, making sure that they know that voting is important. And we went and we make sure we were, as you said, adequately distanced, very well professionally run, politeness all around and understanding. But I like to go in person still, so I probably will be doing again. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, look, whenever I send that check off, you know, normally it's around April 15th this year. They moved it back, but you know, you realize how much money you are sending to this government, and I think it's like I've got to be able to spend 20 minutes, invest 20 minutes in going to have some kind of say about what's going on here. And believe me, I let all the officials I run into, I let them know. It's like, yeah, I'm one of those people. I got my sticker. I'm going to be out there. I'll be in your face if necessary, you know, and it's all good. You know, it's all good. Let me ask you, in fact, how you got into public service. I read that you were an intern to Carl Hastie, who is now the Speaker of the State Assembly. Obviously, I don't think that was even on the radar when you were in his office, but what led you to do that in the first place?
So I always had an interest in the way things worked, right? And again, I've lived in my district my whole life, right? I only know this one area of the Bronx. I've moved around it a little bit, but I know this area of the Bronx. This is home to me. And being able to do something in government, and again at SUNY Albany, it was a 15 credit internship. It was paid, and I got a chance to work in government. It hit every metric, so I applied. And Carl was only a second-term assembly member at that time, and he always wanted to make sure that he got people from his district. Now, going into that, I didn't know the speaker. I didn't know. I knew who he was because I knew who my elected officials were, but I didn't know him on a personal level. And I'll never forget three things about the first conversation I had with Speaker Hastie. I walked in. I'm nervous. I'd never done an internship program before, So interns, you know, and again, nothing against people who make copies and get coffee, but I thought interns made copies and got coffee. So I walked in, I was like, hey, Mr. Hasty, how are you? You know, can I get you some coffee? And I'm here to make, you know, copies, man. He says 3 things. 1, my name is Carl. Mr. Hasty was my father. 2, you're not going to give me coffee because I'm an adult and I don't like coffee. I like tea anyway, but I don't need you to get it for me. And 3, you know, you're here to learn about the legislative process. I want you to get engaged, to be involved, and to get everything that you want to get out of this. So I was like, wow, you know, okay, this is great. And then from there, the political bug bit me, and you know, I've been infected ever since, so to speak.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, talk about the moment, if you can isolate it, when that bug bit you, because there are some people who take internships, and it's a very valuable experience, but they look at what politicians, what elected officials go through, and they say, this is definitely not for me. You know, thank you for the internship. I'll never do this. And it's fine. By process of elimination, it's important to figure out what you don't want to do with your life. When did you decide that this was something for you?
Well, in public service during that internship, I had a lot of latitude. I was able to do things that I guess a quote unquote typical intern weren't doing. I actually helped to draft and research a bill. I'll never forget the bill number. Bill number A9534 of the 2003-2004 legislative session, an act to amend the public health law related to nicotine-laced water. I did the research on that bill. They had it in Maine, they banned it. It's a smoking cessation product. They had a regulation in Westchester County at the time, and they were selling it unregulated. So I was able to see what the legislative process is, from a news article about something that seemed crazy that you're selling unregulated, to being able to reach out to state houses in different states, reach out to different elected officials and their staffs in different areas. And the power of being empowered by Carl to go out and do that, one, as a staff member, and much less an intern, to be able to do that kind of work. And I saw that when you really have people that care about their communities, that care about the work that they do, government not only works, but it works wonders. So I've been hooked ever since.
Okay, fantastic. I've got more to ask you about, but Sam wanted to make a brief announcement to folks.
I just wanted to let everyone know that the Q&A is also open.
Okay, so you send in your questions or comments, and we'll weave that into the conversation. So now, Senator, the thing we keep hearing on the national news night after night after night, which I happen to believe is true, is that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. I think you could probably say that by definition of any presidential race, because there's that much at stake. But this one feels a little bit different. What is your sense of what's going to happen?
Well, one, you're right. This is the most important presidential election of my lifetime. And I would say with anybody's lifetime, because we have somebody in the White House who I think has trampled over what can be considered to be decency and bipartisanship and reasonableness. Also, one of the things that we have to look at as attorneys, right? We should be looking at this. This next administration is going to be able to figure out not one, but two, not one, but 2 Supreme Court justices, more than likely. George W. Bush did a lot that I didn't agree with, the Patriot Act and weapons of mass destruction, but he was able to appoint young jurists of a conservative nature who eventually decided that Citizens United, that corporations were people too. American jurisprudence will be affected in such a negative way, in my opinion, over the next 30 years if we don't vote the right way in November. And again, we may agree politically or disagree politically, but what Donald Trump has been able to do is appoint federal judges that have had no courtroom experience to lifetime judgeships, and that's going to continue to happen over the next 4 years. That's the reason, to me, it's the most important election of my lifetime.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. In fact, I'll give a little plug for my podcast, You Decide, available any place you get your podcast. This week, I talked with Elie Mystal, somebody that does a lot of commentary, a brother you may have seen on MSNBC. And he's on fire about this. He's saying Democrats have not understood how important the courts are as an argument to get people to the polls. That all the lovely things that people are talking about doing, a Green New Deal, Medicare for all of these big ticket items that people want, free tuition, college tuition for every American, all of that is going to end up in the Supreme Court, where in many cases it will die. We saw how Obamacare barely survived with a 5-4 vote in the Supreme Court. And there are many, many, many other issues that are going to have to go through the same sort of process. It's just not something that I've heard a lot of people talk about. And it's something that, as the folks in this meeting and others, I think, enhance their understanding of how government works and what is at stake, it becomes another argument to make to people. Like folks say, oh, I believe in a woman's right to choose on questions of abortion. Well, that can come and that can go. And there's going to be 9 people who make that decision. The people who appoint those Supreme Court justices are really, it's the president. And this is why it's going to be that much more important. So, Senator, where will you be? Because I know you've got a race. You're going to be on the ballot in November. You're running against somebody who you've beaten before, who is running on the conservative party line, not even running as a Republican, I believe. So your race is not going to be all that competitive, shall we say. Will you be working for anybody else to help somebody running for Congress or on the presidential ticket?
Absolutely. And all of the above. There are members of the state Senate that we have to hold their elections. We have to hold their seats. We have to make sure that some of my colleagues return. Senator Pete Harckham has a tough re-election battle in the Hudson Valley, and Pete Harckham has been there when we've needed him. So I'll be there for Pete. All of my colleagues are on Long Island, and we're looking to pick up seats in upstate New York, where we haven't traditionally had Democrats in office. So that's where I will be, not necessarily physically, but I will be making phone calls into any and all districts. And if we can socially distance accordingly, and if people need me there, we can kind of work on that. But that's what we need to do. We need to call our friends and family in different swing states to make sure that we get things going and that they get to the polls, and that if we can flip the U.S. Senate, which I don't know how likely it is, but if there's a chance, the chance is now. The time is now.
Yeah.
Any and everywhere, I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good to hear. It's funny. I've got one of our nephews is staying with us, and he's from Florida. I got a lot of family from Florida. That's where my wife is from. And he was going to change his registration because he's staying up here with us. He's attending college here in the city. And we were like, no. You stay registered down there, where your vote will do a lot more good. And we're trying to organize folks down there. My wife is the 9th of 12 kids. Wow. So she's like a precinct unto herself within her family. So we're trying to make sure all of those folks get organized. This is, politically speaking, kind of a real special moment in history. You're chair of the Codes Committee, as we talked about. The guy that you interned under and basically brought you into public service, Carl Hastie, the first Black Speaker of the State Assembly, which is an immensely powerful position. The majority leader of the Senate, the person who runs the Democratic caucus in the Senate, is, if she's not directly adjacent, she's right nearby your district. Andrea Stewart Cousins, wonderful woman. In fact, she represents New Rochelle, where I grew up. For all of you to be from the same area right there is really kind of a special occurrence. How do we make sure that this isn't just a fluke? In other words, is there a pipeline of leadership, of young people, of young Senator Baileys who are looking to get into office?
I think we got to get involved. Like, young folks have to get involved in their communities and understand that there is something for everybody to do, whether it is elected office, whether it is poll watching, whatever it is, there's a role for everybody to play. They say Black lives matter, but Black leadership matters too. And when you look at bills like the Crown Act, right? Like we got the Crown Act done because we have people like Carl Hastie and Andrea Stewart Cousins who understand the plight of what Black folks, specifically Black women, have been dealing with in the workplace related to the way that they choose to wear their hair. I'm not sure however progressive folks may be, I'm not sure if we don't have Black leadership that understands that this is a kitchen table issue in our house, and it has been for years. I don't know if we get such an important piece of legislation like that done in my eyes. So that's the reason why we got to continue to stay involved.
There was something back in the 80s when Harold Washington became the first Black mayor of Chicago. One of the things they did was they organized something called Grandmothers for Harold. Understanding the structure of the Black community is what sociologists would call matrifocal, meaning women are basically running the show. And it was enormously effective and helped bring about that victory. I mean, there's a lot of real kind of innovative ways that people can take advantage of what works to organize a community. We've got some questions here online. I want to bring these to you, Senator. Senator Bailey, this is from Richard. Senator Bailey, how have you been reaching out to people in your district regarding the census? I think we're about 29 days out from the formal census period.
Okay, so a couple of ways: by being really annoying on social media. I've been tweeting about the census ad nauseum, right? And so it's social media is kind of how I've been doing it. We've been making phone calls at any events that we've had with masks or food distribution. We have flyers. We've done a mailer for it. We're doing our best to reach out to people as much as we possibly can concerning the census, because we're situation critical on par to lose potentially 2 congressional seats. And if you talk about adequate representation, if you feel ignored now, what's going to happen if your districts are even stretched out more and your Congress members have more people to represent? That's not going to be good for any of us. So that itself, in wanting quality representation, we should be able to fill that census out. So we've been doing it by any way possible. Again, on Friday at my book bag giveaway, there will be a table for the census. And again, anything that we've done under the auspices of my office we've had representation from the census. So we want that to continue, but we also need people to be connectors, as Gladwell would say, and go out there and say, Senator Bailey said it, but I need to tell you too.
Okay. There are 2 questions here. I'm going to merge them into one because they're similar. One says there are many international employees living in New York City and unable to vote. The other is from somebody who's a permanent resident and not a citizen who cannot vote, even though they pay taxes. Both of them are asking, what's the best way to, since they can't vote, to use their energy and time to help get involved in this election?
That's a great question. So voting isn't the only way that you can impact the elections. We all know people. You all have friends that can either vote or push people to vote. You have to be that annoying person, at least for the next 29 days when it relates to the census, to say, hey, have you done it? Have you done it? We pick up the phone to use it for memes and tweets and Instagram or whatever it is that we use. Pick up the phone and text somebody to say, hey, have you voted yet? Have you requested your absentee ballot? Have you filled out your census? And again, we share news about what can be considered to be trite celebrity matters. We can share what's going to happen and what's going to affect us for the next 30 years. But next 10 years is definitely when it relates to the census. 30 years as it is, or more, as related to this next election. So call the people that you know, I guess, is the simplest and quickest way I would say.
Okay. Here's a note. In some ways, it's a question. You're exactly the right person for it. This is from Mark, saying that in New York State, we need district attorney reform. No district attorney gets held accountable for their lying in cases. And I assume by that they mean misconduct within the office by assistant district attorneys.
So we actually passed legislation related to the Prosecutorial Misconduct Commission. It passed last year, and it was amended, but unfortunately, some of the courts kind of kicked it down and rendered it I don't want to say toothless, but not to the effect that we wanted to have. So recently, in the last month or so, Assemblymember Nick Perry and I have reintroduced more legislation to try to figure out, okay, because the courts told us that it was unconstitutional in certain ways. So we want to, so now that we know what's unconstitutional, we know how to properly draft the law. And I agree, Mark, district attorneys should be held accountable for lying in their cases, just like anybody should be held accountable for lying in an official judicial proceeding. So I'm there with you, and I don't have the bill number off the top of my head. I wish I did. I'm usually good with that kind of stuff, but that is something that we recognize and that we are currently working on at present.
Okay. Here's an interesting comment. This is from Bobby. He says, I am a conservative. We are going to the polls. Most of our votes will be counted on day one. Considering mail-in voting is going to generate a contested situation, why don't you just say mask up and participate in physical voting in droves? And I think he's got a point there. I mean, where we were in mid to late June, back when New York had its primary, there was a lot of uncertainty about whether the Board of Elections could get it together. It turns out they did a much better job of handling the in-person voting than they did the mail-in voting. Obviously, you don't want to ask anybody to do something that they feel is not healthy or safe, but is it worth maybe sort of just telling people, look, if there's any way to get to the polls, if you think you can keep yourself safe, the Board of Elections is going to meet you halfway. They're going to do distancing. They're going to have disinfectant. They've got early voting, which usually is just a relatively small percentage of the total vote. Is it worth diving in on that, Senator?
Well, I can understand the sentiment behind it, but I think that, again, people are still really scared of this, right? Regardless of what they're saying, the infection rate is below 1%. There is something that's happening in our society that we can't quite understand yet, and we don't understand the full effects of it. So people are still, rightfully so, fearful. So I would say, if you want to go to the polls, sure. But for me to advocate that as opposed to absentee ballot, which is safe, we have a lot of people who want to participate who are much more susceptible to catching COVID-19 because of infirmities, again, that happen within our communities of color. So I don't want to expose them. People died for your right to vote. I don't want you to die going out to vote this year. Maybe, is that a little dramatic? Possibly, but you don't know what could happen. Personal note, my mother-in-law passed away on March 27th because of COVID-19. She passed away. Wow. And so it's real to me. This isn't something that is something that is saying, well, hey, those folks got it. It's not real. No, this is very real and personal to me. So I want you to be as safe as possible, not just as an elected official, but more importantly, as Jamaal Bailey. I want you to be safe. So that's the reason why I can't wholeheartedly say, hey, go out there and expose yourself to something that we can't understand.
Okay, no, that is absolutely fair enough. I got to tell you, by the way, on a personal note, my father lives in your district, in one of the residences that's right there near the border, the big campus where there's like a lot of senior facilities, and they've been locked down. Haven't been able to see him in person, without a whole bunch of rules and restrictions, limited to 20 minutes and all of this kind of stuff for months. So I totally hear you, and I am so sorry to hear about your mother-in-law. This is a note from Raquel, really nice note, saying some nice things about you and me. The question, though, is the current administration has made clear that the courts are key to our future. Glad you touched on that. How best can we reinforce this issue as constituents, voters, and mobilizers? Are there bills and petitions and campaigns that we can support on this issue?
I don't know about there's a specific piece of legislation that I would say, but I do think it's just important to illustrate to people the effect that the courts have. And sometimes we tend to look at government, even though we learned all three, executive, judicial, legislative, we tend to look at the executive when we hear presidents and governors, and legislative when we look at Congress or your state elected officials, right? We ignore the judicial branch far too often. And I think it should be, we should figure out a way to, impressing upon people that I know that's one of the things that I speak about a lot is about judges and making sure that we have good judges that don't just interpret the law for the sake of interpretation, but use context with their interpretation of the law. But I think that it's critical for us to, you got to meet us halfway. Put it out there on your social media. Let's figure out how to. My office is always a resource, whether you live in my district or not. My staff might hate that I said that, and I'm sorry, but reach out to my office if you have a question. And if we can't help you, we'll route you to the proper people. You should be reaching out to your elected officials in larger numbers, showing that your voices matter.
It's interesting. Just talking with you, probably one of the ways to do it is to start with the state judicial races, right, which are important, for civil court or for Supreme Court even, and bring those folks into the community. I mean, it is an election, and get people used to the idea of this is what a judge looks like. It can be somebody from your community. It can be somebody with your values. It could be somebody who you get to meet and ask questions of, and then sort of by analogy, try to make the case that, even more important are these federal judges, and they are appointed by the president or nominated by the president and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So, I mean, there's a way, I think, to maybe start that discussion for sure. This will be our last question, Senator. This is from Philippe, who has, again, some very nice comments. What would you say are the top 3 ways that we can be effective in driving things forward in addition to pulling the lever at the polls? To say it otherwise, what can be done to protect against the locust, however we define that, based on our personal ideologies, regardless of personal animus?
Great question to end up on. One is to know who your elected officials are, right? Know who they are. Know your district boundaries, know who represents you. So when you walk into our offices, you are armed with the knowledge to have that conversation. Second thing, don't be afraid to ask questions because you don't know it all. I don't know it all. I don't know everything about policy, and I'm a policy maker. Be open to the idea that I don't know everything, so I should learn more, right? So learning more, knowing who your elected officials are, being consistent. Consistency is key. Right? Showing up to one event is great, but being that person that comes to every single event in a non-COVID world or zooms into every event so that we know your name. Like I got a constituent, Barbara Gibson. Barbara Gibson lives in Gun Hill houses, and Barbara Gibson comes to every single thing that you do. There's a grass growing competition, Barbara Gibson's there because she is part of the community and part of the conversation. Be that person in the community that your elected officials know, that their staff members know, and that the people know. Last thing I would say in terms of being able to galvanize, understand that you are just as important of a part of the process as any person is. There are elections that are turned by one vote or no votes. If you look at Virginia a couple of years back, control of the Virginia State House was predicated upon a coin flip. Not theoretical, a literal coin flip. Shelley Simmons was a Democratic nominee, and Virginia State Senate would have been Democratic for the first time in 40-something years. But 2 people in Virginia, Democrats, I'm partisan. 2 Democrats in Virginia didn't go vote. So it ended up in a tie. Now, I'm simplifying it because there were some ballots that were invalidated along the way. But the long story short was that election was tied. Seriously, it was tied. It was based on a coin flip. If you want an election, if you want control of your state houses predicated upon a coin flip, then cool. I don't. I want you to vote.
Right. Exactly right. Okay. That brings us to the end of our time. I have very much enjoyed talking with you, Senator. Normally, when I get you on TV, I've got you for maybe 6 minutes if we're lucky. So we did 10 times that much, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. Thanks for spending some time with us. Let me turn things over back to Sam and Jelani.
Thank you guys so much for being here today. On behalf of you and on behalf of Sony, I'm really, really thankful to the both of you. And also, I just want to give some special shout outs to people that have been behind the scenes that have been helping to put this together. So thank you to Rohan Simpson for helping to put this whole event together on the production side. Osei, Gary Miller, also the HUE board. Thank you to Fatsi, Juwan, and Bobby for always being supportive when we're trying to put events together and dealing with all my nitpicking. And to our executive officers, Jeff and Sheldra, Thank you for always supporting us. To Najee Grampus for always helping when it comes to any kind of legislative or voter initiative project with HUE. We really are thankful for you and your support as a really great member. And for HR as well, thank you for being wonderful. And I just want to end and say, if you guys haven't seen it already, please check your inbox because Sony Music has launched a campaign in conjunction with a lot of great folks called, that's relating to your voting. So, your vote, your voice, your power, and your vote is really, really important. So please check out knowyourworth.community for some really great resources on, when to go into early voting and also things relating to voting as well. Just as informed as you can be, we want to help. And so I thank Sony for launching that campaign. And with that, thank you guys all for coming, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.